Welcome to Sleepy Dream. I'm going to read a new book today called Night Chills by Koontz. Night Chills. The beginning. Saturday, August 6, 1977. The dirt trail was narrow. Drooping boughs of tamarack, spruce, and pine scraped the roof and brushed the side windows of the Land Rover. "Stop here, Rosner," said tensely. Holbrook was driving. He was a big, stern-faced man in his early 30s. He gripped the wheel so tightly that his knuckles were bloodless. He braked, pulled the Rover to the right, and coasted in amongst the trees. He switched off the headlamps and turned on a dash light. "Check your gun," Rosner said. Each man wore a shoulder holster and carried a SIG Peter, the finest automatic pistol in the world. They pulled the magazines, checked for a full complement of bullets, slammed the magazines back into the butts, and holstered their guns. Their movements seemed to be choreographed, as if they had practiced this 1,000 times. They got out and walked to the back of the car. At 3 o'clock in the morning, the Maine woods were ominously dark and still. Holbrook lowered the tailgate. A light winked on inside the Rover. He threw aside a tarpaulin, revealing 2 pairs of rubber hip boots, 2 flashlights, and other equipment. Rosner was shorter, slimmer, and quicker than Holbrook. He got his boots on first. Then he dragged his last 2 pieces of their gear from the car. The main component of each device was a pressurized tank, much like a aqualung cylinder, complete with shoulder straps and chest belts. A hose led from the tank to a stainless steel pin-sprayed nozzle. They helped each other into the straps, made certain their shoulder holsters were accessible, and placed a bit to get accustomed to the weight on their backs. At 3:10, Rosner took a compass from his pocket, stuck it in the flashlight beam, put it away, and moved on to the forest. Holbrook followed, surprisingly quiet for such a large man. The land rose rather steeply. They had to stop twice in the next half hour to rest. At 3:40, they came within sight of the big Union sawmill. 300 yards to their right, a complex of 2- and 3-story clapboards and cinder block buildings rose out of the streets. Lights glowed at all the windows, and arc lamps bathed the fenced storage yard in fuzzy purplish-white light. Within the huge main building, giant saws stuttered and whined continuously. Logs and cuts planks toppled from conveyor belts and boomed when they landed in metal bins. Rosner and Holbrook circled around the mill to avoid being seen. They reached the top of the ridge at 4 o'clock. They had no difficulty locating the man-made lake. One end of it shimmered in the wan moonlight, and the other end was shadowed by a high ridge that rose behind it. It was a neat oval, 300 yards long and 200 yards wide, fed by a gushing spring. It served as a reservoir for both the big Union Mill and the small town of Black River that lay 3 miles away in the valley. They followed the 6-foot-high fence until they came to the main gate. The fence was there to keep animals, and the gate was not even locked. They went inside. At the shadowed end of the reservoir, Rosner entered the water and walked out 10 feet before it rose nearly to the top of his hip boots. The walls of the lake slanted sharply, and the depths at the center was 60 feet. He unraveled the hose from a storage reel on the side of the tank, grasped the steel tube at the end of it, and thumped a button. A colorless, odorless chemical exploded from the nozzle. He thrust the end of the tube underwater and moved it back and forth, fanning the liquid as widely as possible. In 20 minutes, his tank was empty. He wound the hose around the reel and looked towards the far end of the lake. Holbrook had finished emptying his tank and was climbing out onto the concrete apron. They met at the gate. "Okay," Rosner asked. "Perfect." By 5:10, they were back at the Land Rover. They got shovels from the back of the car and dug 2 shallow holes in the rich black earth. They burrowed the empty tanks, boots, holsters, and guns. For 2 hours, Holbrook drove along a series of rugged dirt trails, crossed St. John's River on a timber bridge, picked up a gravel lane, and finally connected with a paved road at 8:30. From there, Rosner took the wheel. They didn't say more than a dozen words to each other. At 12:30, Holbrook got out at the starlit motel on Route 15, where he had a room. He closed the car door without saying goodbye, went inside, locked the motel door, and sat by the telephone. Rosner had the Rover's tank filled at Sunoco Station and picked up Interstate 95 south to Waterville and past Augusta. From there he took the main turnpike to Portland, where he stopped at a service level and parked near a row of telephone booths. The afternoon sun made mirrors of the restaurant windows and flashed off the parked cars. Shimmering waves of the hot air rose from the pavement. He looked at his watch, 3:35. He leaned back and closed his eyes. He appeared to be napping, but every 5 minutes he glanced at his watch. At 3:55 he got out of the car and went to the last booth in the row. At 4 o'clock the phone rang. Rosner. The voice at the other end of the line was cold and sharp. "I am the key, Mr. Rosner." "I am the lock," Rosner said dully. "How did it go?" "As scheduled. You missed the 3:30 call only by 5 minutes." The man at the other end hesitated. "Then leave the turnpike at the next exit. Turn right on the state route. Put the rover up to at least 100 miles an hour. 2 miles along, the road takes a sudden turn hard to the right. It's banked by a field stone wall. Do not apply your brakes when you reach the curve. Do not turn with the road. Drive straight into the wall at 100 miles an hour." Rosner stared through the glass of the booth. A young woman was crossing from the restaurant towards a little red sports car. She was wearing tight white shorts with dark stitching. She had nice legs. "Glenn?" "Yes, sir. Do you understand me?" "Yes." "Repeat what I've said." Rosner went through it almost word for word. "Very good, Glenn. Now go do it." "Yes, sir." Rosner turned into the Land Rover and drove back into the busy turnpike. Holbrook sat quietly, patiently on the unlit motel room. He switched on the television set, but he didn't watch it. He got up once to use the bathroom and to get a drink of water, but that was the only break in his vigil. At 4:10 the telephone rang. He picked it up. "Holbrook." "I am the key, Mr. Holbrook." "I am the lock." The man on the other end of the line spoke for half a minute. "Now repeat what I've said." Holbrook repeated. "Excellent. Now do it." He hung up, went to the bathroom, and began to draw a tub full of warm water. When he turned right into the state route, Glenn Rosner pressed the accelerator all the way to the floor. The engine roared, the car's frame began to shimmy. Trees and houses and other cars flashed past, mere blurs of colour. The steering wheel jumped and vibrated in his hands. For the first mile and a half he didn't look away from the road for even a second. When he saw the curve ahead, he glanced at the speedometer and saw that he was doing slightly better than 100 miles per hour. He whimpered, but he didn't hear himself. The only things he could hear were the tortured noises produced by the car. At the last moment he grit his teeth and shuddered. The Land Rover hit the 4-foot-high stone wall so hard that the engine was jammed back into Rosner's flap. The car plowed the way through the wall. Stone shot up and rained back down. The Rover tipped onto its crushed front end, rolled over on its roof, slid across the ruined walls, and burst into flames. Holbrook undressed and climbed into the tub. He settled down in the water and picked up the single razor blade that lay on the porcelain rim. He held the blade by the blunt end and firmly between the thumb and his finger of his right hand, then slashed open the reins in his left wrist. He tried to cut his right wrist. His left hand could not hold the blade. It slipped from his fingers. He plucked it out of the dark water, but in his right hand once more, and cut across the bridge of his left foot. Then he leaned back and closed his eyes. Slowly he drifted down a lightless tunnel of the mind into every deep and darkest darkness, getting dizzying, weak, feeling and surprising little pain. In 30 minutes he was comatose. In 45 minutes he was dead. Sunday, August 7th, 1977. After working all week on the midnight shift, Buddy Pellerini was unable to change his sleeping habits for the weekend. At 4 o'clock Sunday morning, he was in the kitchen of his tiny 2-room apartment. The radio, his most prized possession, was turned down low. Music from all-night Canadian station. He was sitting at the table next to the window, staring fixedly at the shadows on the far side of the street. He had seen a cat running along the walk over there, and the hairs had stood up on the back of his neck. There were two things that Buddy Pellerini hated and feared more than all else in life: cats, and ridicule. For 25 years he had lived with his mother, and for 20 years she had kept a cat in the house. First Caesar, then Caesar the second. She had never realized that the cats were quicker and far more cunning than her son, and therefore obeying to him. Caesar, first or second, it made no difference. Like to lie quietly atop bookshelves and cupboards and high boys until Buddy walked past, and he leapt on Buddy's back. The cat never scratched him badly. For the most part it was concerned with getting a good grip on his shirt so that he could not shake it loose. Every time, if it followed a script, Buddy would panic and run in circles or dart from room to room in search of his mother, with Caesar spitting in his ear. He never suffered much pain from the game. It was the suddenness of the attack, the surprise of it, that terrified him. His mother said Caesar was only being playful. At times he confronted the cat to prove he was unafraid. He approached it as if sunning on a windowsill and tried to stare it down, but he was always the first to look away. He couldn't understand people all that well, and the alien gaze of the cat made him feel especially stupid and inferior. He was able to deal with ridicule more easily than he could deal with cats, if only because it never came as a surprise. When he was a boy, other children had teased him mercilessly. He had learned to be prepared for it, learned how to endure it, but he was bright enough to know that he was different from others. If his intelligence quotient had been several points lower, he wouldn't have known enough to be ashamed of himself, which was what people expected of him. If his IQ had been a few points higher, he would have been able to cope, at least to some extent, with both cats and cruel people, because if he fell in between, his life was lived as an apology for his stunned intellect, a cursed boy as a result of a malfunctioning hospital incubator, which he had been placed after being born 5 weeks prematurely. His father had died in a milling accident when Buddy was 5, and the first Caesar had entered the house 2 weeks later. If his father hadn't died, perhaps there would have been no cats, and Buddy liked to think that with his father alive, no one would dare ridicule him. Ever since his mother had succumbed to cancer 10 years ago, when he was 25, Buddy had worked as an assistant night watchman at the Big Union Supply Company mill. If he suspected that certain people at Big Union felt responsible for him and that his job was make work, he had never admitted it, not even to himself. He was on duty from midnight to 8, 5 nights a week, patrolling the storage yards looking for smoke, sparks and flames. He was proud of his position. In the last 10 years, he had come to enjoy a measure of self-respect that would have been inconceivable before he had been hired. Yet there were times when he felt like a child again, humiliated by other children, the brunt of jokes he could not understand. His boss at the mill, Ed McGrady, the chief watchman on the graveyard shift, was a pleasant man. He was incapable of hurting anyone. However, he smiled when others did the teasing. Ed always told them to stop, always rescuing his friend's Buddy, but always got a laugh from it. That was why Buddy hadn't told anyone what he had seen Saturday morning, nearly 24 hours ago. He didn't want them to laugh. Around that time, he left the storage yard and walked well off into the trees to relieve himself. He avoided the laboratory whenever he could, because it was there that the other men teased him the most and showed the least mercy. At 4:45, he was standing by a big pine tree shrouded in darkness, taking a pee, when he saw 2 men coming down from the reservoir. They carried hooded flashlights that cast narrow yellow beams in the backwash of the lights. As the men passed within 5 yards of him, Buddy saw they were wearing rubber hip boots, as if they had been fishing. They couldn't fish in the reservoir, could they? There was no fish up there. Another thing, each man wore a tank on his back, like skin divers wore on television, and they were carrying guns in shoulder holsters. They looked so out of place in the woods, so strange. They frightened him. He sensed they were killers, like on the television. If they knew they had been seen, they would kill him and bury him out here. He was sure of it, but then Buddy always expected the worst. Life had taught him to think that way. He stood perfectly still, watched them until they were out of sight, and ran back to the storage yard, but he quickly realized he couldn't tell anyone what he had done. They wouldn't believe him, and by God, if he was going to be ridiculed for telling what was only the truth, then he would keep it quite secret. Just the same, he wished he could tell someone, if not the watchman at the mill. He thought about it, but still could not make sense of those skin divers or whatever they were. In fact, the more he thought about it, the more bizarre it seemed. He was frightened by what he could not understand. He was certain that if he told someone it could be explained to him, then he wouldn't be afraid. But if they laughed, well, he didn't understand their laughter either. And that was even more frightening than the mystery man in the woods. On the far side of the main street, the cat scampered from the heavy purple shadow and ran east towards Edison General Store, startling Buddy out of his reverie. He pressed against the window pane and watched the cat until it turned the corner, afraid that it would try to sneak back and climb up his third-floor rooms. He kept a watch on the place where it had vanished. For the moment, he had forgotten the men in the woods, because his fear of cats was far greater than his fear of guns and strangers. Part 1. Conspiracy. Saturday, August 13th, 1977. When he drove around the curve into the small valley, Paul Annandale felt a change come over him. After 5 hours behind the wheel yesterday and 5 more today, he was weary and tense. But suddenly his neck stopped aching and his shoulders unknotted. He felt at peace, as if nothing could go wrong in this place, as if he was Hugh Conway in Lost Horizon and he was just entering Shangri-La. Of course, the Black River was not Shangri-La, not by any stretch of the imagination. It existed and maintained its population of 400 solely as an adjunct of the mill. For a company town, it was quite clean and attractive. The main street was lined with tall oak and birch trees. The houses were New England colonials, white frame and brick salt boxes. Paul supposed he responded to it so positively because he had no bad memories to associate with it, only good ones, and that could not be said of many places in man's life. There's Edison's store. There's Edison. Mark Annandale leaned over from the back seat, pointed through the windshield. Smiling, Paul said, "Thank you." Coonskin Pete, Scout of the North. Raya was excited as her brother, for Sam Edison was like a grandfather to them, but she was more dignified than Mark. At 11, she yearned for the womanhood that was still years ahead of her. She sat up straight in her safety harness beside Paul on the front seat. She said, "Mark, sometimes I think you're 5 years old instead of 9. "Oh, yeah? Well, sometimes I think you're 60 instead of 11. "Touché," Paul said. Mark grinned. Usually he was no match for his sister. This sort of quick response was not his style. Paul glanced sideways at Raya and saw that she was blushing. He winked to let her know that he was laughing at her. Smiling, shrugged herself again. She settled back in her seat. She could have topped Mark's line with a better one and left him mumbling, but she was capable of generosity, not a particularly common quality in children her age. The instant the station wagon stopped at the curb, Mark was out on the pavement. He bounded up the 3 concrete steps, raced across the wide river veranda, and disappeared into the store. The screen door slammed shut behind him just as Paul switched off the engine. Raya was determined not to make a spectacle of himself, as Mark had done. She took her time getting out of the car, stretched and yawned, smoothed the knees of her jeans, straightened the collar of her dark blue blouse, patted her long brown hair, closed the car door, and went up the steps. By the time she reached the porch, however, she too had begun to run. Edison's general store was an entire shopping centre in the 3,000 square feet. There was one room 100 feet long and 30 feet wide with an ancient pegged pine floor. The east end of the store was a grocery. There was the west end held dry goods and sundries, as well as a gleaming modern dry drug counter, as his father had been before him. Sam Edison was the town's only licensed pharmacist. In the centre of the room, 3 tables and 12 oak chairs were grouped in front of a wood-burning country stove. Originally, you could find elderly men playing cards at one of those tables, but at the moment the chairs were empty. Edison's store was not just a grocery and pharmacy, it was also Black River's community centre. Paul opened the heavy lid on the soda cooler and plucked a bottle of Pepsi from the icy water. He sat down at one of the tables. Raya and Mark were standing at an old-fashioned glass-fronted candy counter, giggling at one of Sam's jokes. He gave them sweets and sent them to the paperback and comic book stores to choose presents for themselves. Then he came over and sat with his back to the cold stove. They shook hands across the table. At a glance, Paul thought Sam looked hard and mean. He was very solidly built, 5'8", 160 pounds, broad in the chest and shoulders. His short-sleeved shirt revealed powerful forearms and biceps. His face was tanned and creased, and his eyes were like chips of grey slate. Even with the thick white hair and beard, he looked more dangerous than grandfatherly, and he could have passed as a decade younger than his 55 years. But this forbidding exterior was misleading. He was warm, a gentle man, a pushover for children. Most likely he gave away more candy than he sold. Paul had never seen him angry, had never heard him raise his voice. "When did you get in town?" "This is our first stop." "You didn't say in your letter how long you'd be staying this year." "4 weeks." "6, I think." "Wonderful." His grey eyes glittered merrily, but in that very craggy face the expression might have appeared to be malice to anyone who didn't know him well. "You're staying the night with us as planned? You aren't going up into the mountains today?" Paul shook his head. "No, tomorrow will be soon enough. We've been on the road since 9 this morning. I don't have strength to pitch camp this afternoon." "You're looking good, though." "I'm feeling good now that I'm in Black River." "Needed this vacation, did you?" "God, yes." Paul drank some of the Pepsi. "I'm sick to death of high-potence poodles and Siamese cats with ringworms." Sam smiled. "I've told you 100 times, haven't I? You can't expect to be an honest veterinarian when you set up shop in the suburbs of Boston. Down there, you are nursemaid for neurotic house pets, and the neurotic owners get out into the country, Paul. You mean I ought to involve myself with cows calving and mares fowling? Exactly. Paul sighed. Maybe I will one day. You should get those kids out of the suburbs, out where the air is clean and the water drinkable. Maybe I will. He looked towards the rear of the store, towards the curtain doorway. Is Jenny here? I spent all morning filling prescriptions and now she's out delivering them. I think I've sold more drugs in the past 4 days than I usually sell in 4 weeks. Epidemic? Yeah, flu, gripe, whatever you want to call it. What does Doc Troutman call it? Sam shrugged. He's not really sure. Some new breed of flu, he thinks. What's he prescribing? A general purpose antibiotic. Tetracycline. That's not particularly strong, yes, but this flu isn't all that devastating. Is this tetracyclic helping? It's too soon to tell. Paul glanced at Ryan and Mark. They're safer here than anywhere else in town, Sam said. Jenny and I are about the only people in Black River who haven't come down with it. If I get there in the mountains and find I've got 2 sick kids on my hands, what should I expect? Nausea? Fever? None of that, just night chills. Paul tilted his head quizzingly. Damn scary, as I understand. Sam's eyebrows drew close together in one bushy white bar. You wake up in the middle of the night as if you just had a terrible dream. You shake so hard you can't hold on to anything. You can barely walk. Your heart is racing. You're pouring sweat, and I mean sweating pints, like you've got awful high blood pressure. It lasts as much as an hour, then it goes away as if it never was. Leaves you weak most of the next day. Frowning, Paul said, doesn't sound like flu. Doesn't sound like much of anything, but it scares the hell out of people. Some of them got sick Tuesday night, and most of our others joined in on Wednesday. Every night they wake up shaking, and every day they're weak, a bit tired. Damn few people around here have had a good night's sleep this week. Has Doc Troutman gotten a second opinion in any of those cases? Nearest other doctor is 60 miles away, Sam said. He did call the State Health Authority yesterday afternoon, asked for one of their field men to come and have a look, but they can't send anyone until Monday. I guess they can't get very excited about an epidemic of night chills. The chills could be the tip of an iceberg, could be, but you know, bureaucrats. When he saw Paul glance at Ryan and Mark again, Sam said, look, don't worry about it. We'll keep the kids away from everyone who's sick. I was supposed to take Jenny up to the street to Altman's Cafe. We were going to have a nice quiet dinner together. If you catch the flu from a waitress or another customer, you'll pass it on to the kids. Skip the cafe, have dinner here. You know I'm the best cook in Black River. Paul hesitated, laughing softly, stroking his beard with one hand. And I said, we'll have an early dinner, 6 o'clock, then give you and Jenny plenty of time together. You can go for a ride later, or I'll keep myself and the kids out of the den if you'd rather just stay home. Paul smiled. What's on the menu? Manicotti. Who needs Altman's Cafe? Sam nodded agreement. Only the Altmans. Ryan and Mark hurried over to get Sam's approval of the gifts they'd chosen for themselves. Mark had $2 worth of comic books and Ryan had 2 paper bags. Each of them had small bags of candy. Ryan's blue eyes seemed especially bright to Paul, as if there were lights behind them. She grinned and said, Daddy, this is going to be the best vacation we've ever had. Thanks for listening.